accepted to take part in this conversation. And each of you will have 10 minutes to speak, and unfortunately, I will have to be very strict in relation to time. So when you reach 7 minutes, I will let you know that you have to approach the conclusion. I will give the floor to Professor Vijay Prashad from the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, who started off the year with a letter co-written with Noel Chomsky and shared by the Institute that operates in 3 continents and have been carrying out very important work in research and discussions that incite us to rethink our model of civilization. So without further ado, Vijay, thank you very much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Agnes, thanks a lot for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be in this illustrious panel, and I'll try my best to represent the work of the Institute, Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. At the beginning of the pandemic, Arundhati Roy, the novelist, wrote an essay which she titled "The Pandemic is a Portal," hoping that out of the catastrophe, particularly in countries governed by bourgeois governments who had put, of course, profit before their people, very fact that United States, Brazil, India are leading in coronavirus infections and deaths should tell us something about the character of these governments that put profits of the elites in China, Vietnam, Laos, New Zealand, and so on. She had hoped that the lesson would be learned from this pandemic and that changes would be made in the international order, in our domestic situations. I'm afraid during the course of this year, quite the opposite is on display. And therefore, my presentation, my 10-minute presentation, is called The 3 Apartheids. And I would like to just point out sequentially each apartheid. The first apartheid is a money apartheid. The external debt of developing countries stands at around $11 trillion. This is an enormous sum of money. Debt servicing payments in this calendar year will amount to roughly $3.9 trillion. Neither the London group nor the Paris group of creditors, wealthy bondholders, banks, and so on, have been willing to provide not only pause on debt servicing, but they're not willing to provide debt forgiveness. And I'm coming back to the word forgiveness in a second. 60 countries on the planet Earth right now, out of 193, 60 countries are spending more to service their debt than to pay for the healthcare of their public, including relief in this pandemic. 60 countries are servicing their debt at a higher rate than they spend on the medical care of their population. Meanwhile, $37 trillion sits in illicit tax havens. That's the amount that we calculate, but I'm sure the number is much higher. 3 times the external debt of the developing world is sitting in illicit tax havens. The IMF chief is saying, go out and spend money because money is cheap. But this is not what they are telling the developing world. This is what they are telling the advanced industrial countries. And this is why I call it money apartheid. There are 2 standards in terms of how money is treated in the world. One standard for the rich countries, for the wealthy bondholders, for the big banks and so on, and another standard for the ordinary people of the world. There's nothing to forgive when we talk about debt forgiveness. It should simply be cancelled. Colonialism is something to put on the table. Emmanuel Macron recently said France will not apologize for Algeria. The British will barely apologize for Jallianwala Bagh. Forget about imperialism. We don't want debt forgiveness. We want debt cancellation. First apartheid. Second apartheid, medical apartheid. The head of the WHO, Dr. Tedros, has said there is a catastrophic moral failure. Vaccine nationalism, vaccine hoarding. Canada has 5 vaccines per Canadian national. 5. Why do they need 5 when you only need 2? Most countries in the world will have no vaccines, but the Canadians already have 5 per head. This is what we call vaccine hoarding. Of course, we are interested in virus suppression, testing, contact tracing, quarantine, isolation. Of course, we are interested in that, but we also want vaccines. We also want vaccines.
Tudo bom, cara?
The second issue that we're dealing with here is therefore medical apartheid. Not only are we not being able to access vaccines, but we want to put on the table the question that the International Monetary Fund in the last 50 years has demanded that developing countries either cut back on public health spending or dismantle original pharmaceutical production and simply become part of the pharmaceutical commodity chain. In other words, produce drugs for largely Western drug companies to be sold at their pleasure. This is outrageous. We need to return to regional understanding of pharmaceutical production. You'll remember that the Americans bombed the only pharmaceutical company in Sudan, the Al-Shifa plant in Khartoum, never rebuilt, no apology, no money paid to Al-Shifa. It was falsely accused of being a chemical weapon producing plant. The only pharmaceutical manufacturing plant in Sudan at the time. We need to return to the table, rebuild public health along the Declaration of Alma-Ata Principles from 1978, one of the most important declarations of the WHO and UN world. We need to return to Alma-Ata, rebuild public health institutions globally, and we need to rebuild pharmaceutical production on a regional basis so that cold chain problems, how do you transport vaccines at minus 60 degrees? That is, the Pfizer vaccine requires minus 60 degrees centigrade. Cold chain problems don't become insurmountable because we should develop regional pharmaceutical production. The second apartheid is medical apartheid. The third apartheid is food apartheid. We have farmers sitting outside Delhi, tens of thousands of farmers since the 26th of November, protesting against a government that basically wants to commercialize and privatize and hand over Indian agriculture to big corporates. That's what the 3 farm bills have been. Indian farmers are standing up in tens of thousands. 250 million workers went on strike on the 26th of November. We have documented that the farmers' demand is the demand of Indian farmers' demand is the demand of farmers worldwide. We want agriculture to be on a community basis. It should be to feed people, not to feed the banks, not to feed profit. Let me tell you something. The International Monetary Fund has demanded that countries like India cut back on subsidies. Meanwhile, just to take the United States of America, leave out Europe for a minute. Meanwhile, in the United States of America, in the last 20 years, the US government has at a minimum transferred $1.7 trillion to its farming sector in subsidies. Last year alone, the US government transferred $22 billion to its farmers, the highest it's been in 14 years because of the pandemic. So it's okay for the goose. It's okay for the goose to subsidize its agriculture, but the gander must not be allowed to do it. This is food apartheid. In India, 1 in 2 people is struggling to feed themselves each day. 1 in 2 people struggling to feed themselves. Hunger rates are gnawing at the edge of the world. Hunger rates are gnawing at the edge of the world, and yet we're talking about commercializing agriculture at this time. It's apartheid because you have one standard for Europe and the United States, and you have another standard for the developing world. I've talked about money apartheid. I've talked about medical apartheid. I've talked about food apartheid. These are the 3 apartheids. And look at the Western countries. Look at what they're doing right now. They are not using this as an opportunity for cooperation. You know, I quite agree with Xi Jinping's speech at Davos this week, where he talked about multilateralism and cooperation. I want to repeat in my last minute the slogan given by the WHO's Director General, Dr. Tedros. We need solidarity, not stigma. We need solidarity, not stigma. We don't need forgiveness. We need cancellation of debt. But I want to add another slogan, adding to Dr. Tedros's slogan. We need cooperation. We don't need confrontation. We don't want the United States to criminally sanction countries like Venezuela, put Cuban doctors deserve the Nobel Peace Prize for their behavior. They do not deserve to be on the state support of terrorism list. It is a criminal act that the US government has done. They should be sanctioned by the UN General Assembly for that. And the Nobel Prize Committee must honor itself by giving the Cuban doctors the prize. The Cuban doctors don't want that honor. The prize will be honored when the Cubans win the prize. We want cooperation. We don't want confrontation. We want solidarity, not stigma. Thanks a lot.
Muito obrigada, Professor Vijay.
Thank you very much, Professor Vijay. I'm very touched by everything you said, and the South-South dialogue must be each day stronger. So our next invitee is John McDonald from the Labour Party, one of the main global players in the discussion around the New Deal, and he's been working with the right, the left, the center, the whole society, because we have lots of implications. So McDonald has a long public and political background with several struggles. So John, thank you very much for being with us, and we'd like to listen to you. I give you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I just say I agreed with every word Vijay said in that incredibly eloquent speech. The outrage that Vijay is expressing in all our individual countries as we go through COVID. Vijay is right. We took the Andrassy Roy view that this could be a portal into a new world, but it's proving not to be. But nevertheless, there's still many of us campaigning to enable that to happen. We've launched in this country, in the UK, a campaign around claiming the future, so that we claim the future, the people claim the future, and not the establishment. I don't accept the slogan, build back better, because we don't want to build back. We want to claim a new future for ourselves. I want to focus on the discussions that have taken place with regard to climate change and where we go from here, and try and develop an argument around first of all, explaining, I think, how far we've come, but how far we need to go, and the targets that we have this year. In 2019, I think we do have to actually congratulate people who have been campaigning for so long around the existential threat of climate change, because actually the climate change did enter into the public discourse and not just the political discourse. I say that except in one particular sphere of influence, and that was under the proto-fascist Donald Trump. At least he's now gone. But actually, even in the US at state level, there were those debates and discussions, and climate change penetrated that political debate. And actually to have the UN General Secretary General at that point to actually go to areas, point and say the point of no return is no longer over the horizon, it's in sight. I think that was a significant breakthrough. But I think we have to recognize as well, it wasn't the traditional political parties or traditional politicians that actually enabled us to enter this debate effectively. And it was the social movements, campaigns by indigenous people, the school strikes. You know, we should not underestimate the role of Greta Thunberg and the school strikes, but also in countries like my own and elsewhere, it was direct action that brought this issue onto the politicians' agenda. The establishment and capital's response, we need to be absolutely clear about that. In terms of the corporations, it was greenwashing, a public relations campaign to demonstrate that somehow they had some environmental commitment when actually they just continued on as virtually normal. In terms of finance capital, it was an interesting reaction where some finance capital was recognizing that in the energy sector, there will be stranded assets and they were moving away from them. but actually it was extremely limited, and the fossil fuel, particularly the investment in mining, continues on. And there's now a huge level of greenwashing of finance capital investment. With regard to governments, across the globe, you saw governments express commitment to tokenistically to policy initiatives, but most of them were corporate captured. And there was great statements, but very little action. Then along came COVID in 2020. The COP talks, the COP26 talks were postponed until 2021, which was going to be a main focus of some of our demands and protests and action. But naturally, political and civil society's attention was directed at survival during the pandemic. I think many of us thought there was a real risk that the climate threat will be neglected as an issue and almost taken off the agenda. And it's true, it has been relegated to the margins of some media coverage and some public discourse, possibly understandably. But actually, I think there is evidence, significant evidence, that the concern on the ground that we, as we work our way through the COVID crisis, we must recognize that we face the existential threat rushing towards us now of climate change. And I think actually the discussions that are taking place now within civil society actually have again penetrated the political class. And we now therefore have a recognition, sometimes tokenistic, but I think a growing recognition that this threat has to be faced up to as we come through COVID, and action is needed now. And it's interesting how that's been linked to the discussions around the economic recessions that we're now facing across the globe as a result of COVID and the lockdown, the rising joblessness and poverty, insecurity. And as Vijay has said, actually across the globe, actually hunger reappearing in many areas that may not have not even experienced it for quite a while. So actually key discussions are taking place across the globe, and they're moving beyond just the survival of as the vaccinations are being developed and distributed, but also the need for recovery planning. So the 2019 campaigning around climate change by civil society, the civil society mobilization has had its effect. And even if only in times of lip service, now governments are having to recognize that they have to promote some form of green recovery plan rather than simply building back better, as some of them have been advocated. So I think the concept of a Green New Deal recovery plan is beginning to take hold. And that's the challenge, to turn the green words, the speeches, the verbiage from just speeches into concrete action plans. And it is down to socialists and progressives now working hard in each individual country, but globally as well now, to develop in more detail their ideas for policy programs that we can coordinate, investment plans to implement the Green New Deal and secure the transition from fossil fuel dependency to sustainable environmental sustainability. I've been trying to survey the work to educate ourselves within the development of our own Green New Deal in the UK. I've been trying to survey the work across the globe, and it is impressive. The work around alternative energy sources, wind, solar, wave, heat pumps, insulation, and the investment plans that people have developed, largely as a result of social movement discussions, has been incredibly creative. And also the issues around environmental biodiversity, the rewilding of whole areas, the tackling of pollution, air pollution, plastics, with regard to the oceans, and the development of alternatives, I think has been on a scale maybe not properly acknowledged so far, so that we can draw upon each other's technical expertise now to meet this challenge. The other issue as well is there's been the discussion around agency. How can you implement these plans and ensure that they're implemented? And it is around the role of the public sector, state investment banks, national investment banks, also regulation. And that the debate now that's arriving, and with regard to constitutional legal rights to environmental protections, but also I've come from an earlier meeting today about the constitutional right to food to be established in law so that legal challenges can take place against policies that actually undermine that.
John, you have 3 minutes.
Certainly, thank you. With regard, there's also the issue of international cooperation. And what I found incredibly refreshing is now the debate and the discussion that's taking place about the need for global reform. And it has moved beyond, exactly as Vijay has said, this is not about debt forgiveness. That's an outrageous expression. This is about reparations from those colonial imperial powers that have exploited the global south for so long. And therefore it is about wiping out debt. And it is about the free transfer of technology. And it is about transforming the international institutions of the IMF, the World Bank and the UN so that they're truly accountable or should be replaced. We are campaigning for a just transition, not just a replacement of what went on before. I just say that finally then, it's critical that there are two actions globally that we work towards. One is the sharing of our ideas, our policy programs, our action programs, our plans to learn from one another, what a Green New Deal could and should comprise and how it could be implemented. Secondly, that we mobilize civil society, social movements, again, as we did in 2019, to provide an unstoppable climate of opinion that ensures government, politicians and others adopt and act upon those plans. But also that we recognize that we have to mobilize to fend off corporate influence that will delay and frustrate our proposals for transition. So that can be summed up, and I repeat, exactly as Vijay, can be summed up in terms of international solidarity, determined mobilization, and cooperation. We're entering a critical period. The COP26 has now reconvened in the UK for later this year. It has to become a target for us now to where we campaign for new, solid, firm, determined commitments on climate change, but also processes of accountability of the global institutions and the national institutions by which we can achieve this. There is the opportunity, and it is extremely limited, I recognize this with Trump going, but nevertheless, it's an opportunity with the Biden administration, no matter how limited. So I think we need that single focus now on COP this year so that we can, yes, ensure that the post-COVID recovery has to be a Green New Deal recovery. On that basis, yes, it is a commitment to solidarity.
Muito obrigada, companheiro John, pela sua contribuição.
Thank you very much, John, for your contribution, as you give us much interesting information about someone who's in Europe living and experiencing this at the moment. I now give the floor to the first Brazilian amongst our speakers here, Cândido Witowski, who is representing a very important organization, Ibazi, the Organization for Socioeconomic Analysis formed by Betinho, and is launching an important article about the commons, which I had the honor to read, and it has been very important. He has been a very important thinker for the Brazilian contemporaneous time. So thank you. Please share with us any of your knowledge. Thank you very much, Agnes. And I'd like to say this is a very good initiative, the Nature Popular Forum. I will focus more in activism than some of the big issues, but always looking from the point of view of the problems that we face and the experiences that we have. And these are the things that we're looking for. How do we face all these problems? First of all, I'd like to share with you how I see transition, ecological transition. This is what we're discussing. Of course, it is essential to look at this question. It's absolutely, I'm not questioning this. I also believe that we need to review our consumes. This is the only planet that we have. We need to look after it. But there are a number of possibilities, and we are very diverse in our citizenship and in our planet. So there isn't just one possible solution, but we have a diversity of solutions. And we're talking above all that it is a question that unless we citizens don't think about solutions, we can't expect anything from the state. So we need to find ways of creating a strategic reflection. We can't face the climate crisis and the discussion about technology if we don't think about the social issues, inequality, exclusion. One thing takes us to another. So we can't prioritize the social or the environmental. We are dealing with the situations that all life forms are going through. So I don't like to talk just about ecological transition. I like talking about eco-social transition. And this is already a debate or a struggle. We had in this region progressive government, but we had this contradiction here. In order to deal with social questions, we had environmental destruction. But this is the region that had more mining. Then we also invested, Brazil invested a lot on oil. It's not just the USA, it's us, our regional governments who have invested against the environment. Now it's even worse, but this is not something that is happening just now. And the large mining projects. So we cannot think that we continue doing the same things that we did before. And it's not just a question of this redistribution, social distribution, but we need to also deal with the environment, because otherwise we're going to have social problems as well. That's the first issue. And then we need to focus on capitalism. So if it's an eco-social transition, that is in opposition to capitalism development. So I think the problem is development in itself. This is the basis that it works. So growing without limits is not possible because the government is limited. And we can't move just in terms of accumulation. And we can see that it's not possible. We know that we're going towards barbarity in the world. It may be the implosion or the destruction that the scientists are talking about. But I think that the options that we have to face these problems is us, the citizens, to take over. I don't expect much from the states, from the nation states. This is a contradiction itself. It's not development that has to be sustainable. It's the planet, it's society. Economy has to serve humanity based on caring, based on sharing, based on co-responsibility and so on. So this is the second issue. Then we have the third issue. Then we have the eco-socialism paradigm. I am attracted towards it because it's trying to rethink a Eurocentric thinking or concept. The idea is doing the same development without destruction in a faster way. And social democracy may have been able to achieve certain things, but it didn't essentially change anything. It didn't manage to change anything. And now I have read Charles Levy, for example, in terms of ecosocialism, but I fear a prefixation of socialism as a thing. I think we need to rethink of a direction, a strategic direction, and not a model. We need to find a collective search for new ways of organizing ourselves. Yes, we will need power, we will need the state, we will need market, but who should be the center of this process is the organized civil society with the ability of controlling power and managing the market. It is within this perspective that I have looked at all the concepts and thinking that's coming up or emerging lately. All these experiences that try to develop the new culture of citizenship management and the learnings that we can get from it, of sharing, production, and management, and what sort of policies that we need to act, and in which conditions we need to have the market to act. But this seems to be the main issue for me. What we need most of all is to bring the citizens, civil society with us. In Brazil, we have let's say, a more middle-class position, which prioritizes the environment. But we have all these people living in the peripheries, millions of people in poverty, and all these things come together. And perhaps these are the places where we see eco-socialism coming. Because if you're condemned in living in a favela, it means you don't have water, you don't have transport, you spend 2 or 3 hours waiting for transport, you have no health, and so on. So you have 3 minutes. I just would like to insist on this, that we have a political problem in struggle in society, in our thinking, that in order to organize a common vision, a shared vision, which can become an irresistible movement, creating a large process. We can do this, but we are in a very difficult situation at the moment because of the pandemics, because of the governments that we have, and everything that has been created here. But it's surprising how easy it was to dismantle everything that was done. Well, I'll stop here for the moment. Thank you. Thank you, Cândido, and thank you for bringing all these very important concerns and get us to think. And it's good that we have you here so we can get out of our comfort zone. Before moving to our next speaker, I just would like to observe that we have less women in this event, and very few non-white people. And this is a portrait of our society. And we can't let this go on without reflecting about the factors that lead us to this, which are part of this debate here. So more and more we need in the universities, institutions, political parties, and so on, to open spaces for women, indigenous people, Black and Asian people. Otherwise, we will never be able to promote the changes that we need. So with this, I would like to invite the first woman to speak to us, Florence Bonaski, who is part of the executive direction of Parti de Gauche in France, responsible for the Latin American relations. Florence, you're welcome. Thank you. I am the second, because you were the first person to speak. No, I'm just helping out in the debate here. Thank you very much for your invitation, and I would like to welcome all those who spoke before me. I speak from France, from Parti de Gauche, a French party, but I speak in Portuguese because I lived many years in Brazil, and that may be my second country. I have follow the struggles in Brazil. First, I would like to thank for being invited to this event, because this is part of a continuation of a first invitation I received, and the part of the Ecosocialist event in Latin America. Because since last year, and going back in the work that we have been doing since 2013, we have been organized an international process of reflection about eco-socialism. It is good to talk after Cândido because we understand these debates. Partido Gauche is a socialist party, and I will put forward some ideas in relation to this. I understand what Cândido has said, and also bringing some new reflections as to what to do, which is the real question that we need to be addressing. I would also like to discuss some of the concepts that we've mentioned. I'd like to comment on the title in terms of this word transition, in terms that we need to be careful when we talk about transition, because the transitional process may be something very slow. And I think it's been going on for a long time. In our party, we approached the idea of a bifurcation, and because we believe this is a far more concrete process and more objective, which avoids what many may understand as part of transition, as we were able to negotiate with the status quo. We can see this in France, in Europe, and I'm sure John has also commented on this. This is very clear. We can see the point where this discussion, it was something more marginal. Now it's become hegemonic. And when these processes become hegemonic, they take a certain tendency. For example, today is green capitalism that's being implemented by the large companies and governments, which may seduce or seem for part of the population, which has already been doing this transition, something attractive. Also, we see the environmental movements, which have very legitimate agenda, but when they point to certain struggles, when certain animals are becoming extinct, for example, they don't question society. And this seems to be one of the main important things that we should be talking, because we need to think about what causes we're fighting for, and they're all based in the process of hegemony of capitalism. And we recognize ourselves in the theories of the era of capitalism, where we start to consider our relationship with the planet. And these causes, they need to be analyzed from the idea of ecology. So it's in the basis of its conceptions, in the roots of capitalism. And that's why eco-socialism has always legitimacies. We could even question eco in socialism, because socialism, as taught by Marx, already had some of the elements that we're thinking about now, in that capitalism damages not only workers, but all the environment that they need to survive. So this is nothing new. We're just basically placing this discussion of ecology in the same level socialism, to build a new equilibrium, either economic or institutional or social. Before getting into solutions, I wanted to talk about civil societies in terms of what happened in terms of the Gilets jaunes in France, which was a very interesting experience. For those who don't know, they started by fighting against the price of petrol. And these movements wouldn't necessarily be an anti-ecological agenda. And this developed, and it became very big, even questioning the institutional equilibrium in France, and got together with other movements that were taking place. And the banner that remained in the minds of people was end of the world, end of the month, the same struggle. This means there is the fact that we're fighting against what is happening in terms of work, in terms of women. This cannot happen unless we question the system in which we live in. This is very important for us to highlight, to show which way we need to follow. Political ecology conceptions go beyond environmental issues and political issues. I don't know how much time I still have, but I think I should be concluding. So I'd like to conclude with what this represents. If we're talking about bifurcation, what does that mean? And we can identify new relations, work relations, when we decommodify society and we change our relations, trade deals, and how they organize the world of work and how they impact in society. And I'm speaking from a country of the north who represents this process, and how this is dependent on the trade deals. So the idea is to reorganize the economic relations and think of new ways of valuing the work and the ecological reorganization of society. When we're talking about the global warming and greenhouse gases, there are many areas and talk about economic investments that can be done, and there are many research that can be done to reorganize the economy in this new energy remodeling. And then we have to think about new institutions that can open spaces for civil society and popular involvement. And we can see this, that it is important to go back to cooperation between people and solidarity, as we can see in these times of COVID. And this moment of mutual help is one of the bases of the ecosystem compared with competition, with a competition system. These are some of the paths that we need to think or take, and I would just like to conclude by saying that by analyzing the causes, we need to understand that when we're talking about the mobilization of society, that these are vectors and players, and look at society and we say, look how you are irresponsible, look how you're destroying society. But we need to rethink this, because this is a consequence of so-called green capitalism, which makes individual responsible. Society will never have an individual impact such as companies have, for example. Like we can see the dams have broken in Brazil, for example. So in this sense, society is a vector for transformation. And I think I have already spoken a lot. And I would like, therefore, to thank everybody and for being able to speak here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was very interesting to hear about your Brazilian experiences. So I could have the sense of a Latin sense. Anyway, talking about Latin America, I'm very glad to give the floor to Silvia Queiroa, my Latin sister. She's from El Salvador. She's part of the Friends of the Earth, this organization that operates in several countries worldwide, fighting for environmental rights and the peoples of the forest. So Silvia, please, you have the floor.
Seu microfone está mudo, Silvia. Vou pedir, por favor.
You are on mute. So Silvia, please unmute yourself.
Ahora sí.
Can you hear me now? Agora sim.
Bueno, muchas gracias por la invitación. Yo voy a hacer una presentación del análisis de nuestros grupos miembros de América Latina y el Caribe, que hacemos parte de Amigos de la Tierra Internacional. Quiero comenzar con plantear que las profundas crisis sociales y ambientales que ahora vive la región y el mundo tienen sus causas en el actual modelo de desarrollo, tanto el cambio climático como la pérdida de biodiversidad, la escasez del agua, la crisis de los cuidados y ahora la crisis sanitaria. Son efectos del sistema económico, político y ideológico que ha privilegiado la acumulación de capital en detrimento de los sistemas ecológicos, que por siempre han posibilitado la vida, ¿verdad? Los actores centrales de este sistema siempre han buscado lucrarse con las crisis e imponen soluciones que no son más que muchas veces maquillaje verde, ¿verdad? Pero que están consolidando la apropiación privada, la mercantilización, la financiarización de la naturaleza y que han venido despojando a los pueblos que históricamente han cuidado los ríos, las semillas, las montañas, los bosques.
Rivers, mountains, the environment in general. The Friends of the Earth Latin American and the Caribbean is also part of the International Federation of Human Rights that was striving for change, that tries to reduce oppression of the system by dismantling the patriarchal system, racism, colonialism, in order to favor and foster a new where we take into account the people. So we need the commitment of people to consolidate a popular power. And this has to be done alongside other movements, feminists, indigenous peoples, African Americans, farmers, fishermen. And one example would be what we had been working on in Latin America and what we called the Continental Day. It's an organization of Friends of the Earth. We're developing this with other movements. We're combining it with, in order to promote the communication on the issue of being a predator, being prey in this society. And this has to be organized from a point of view of justice and be people-centered. So we've been building on this, and we believe that from social organizations, the initiatives have to be directed to favor people. We have tried to implement initiatives that have popular collective political powers at the forefront, anti-racist measures, anti-feminist measures, but also a nationalist system, a society that is based on life itself, where productive work is the basis of society, and that is able to respond to crises that the capitalist system leads to. So dismantle the capitalist pressure. We think that we can't have eco-socialism or development if we don't dismantle these previous systems and organizations. We also believe that we need to go against the political agenda and the public policies of the administration, because we need to put the people at the center of decision making. The current system, we have legitimized this sort of politics because big transnational companies are not favoring society. We need to put people at the forefront and at the center of these initiatives. So we need to create a popular power so that we can have a full democracy where there's participation and where answers are provided to solve the real issues. We also believe that it's important to go against the current economic system that has to do with economic justice and create new social relationships and putting the work at the center of all of this, because this improves people's lives. Through policies and measures, we can achieve this. And we also need to focus on ecological systems so we can achieve all of this together. Sustainability, life, and people have to be the main principles of the economic principles, and social exploitation, for instance, sexual division and gender-based division in the workplace. Let's not forget that women are striving to eliminate the divide between men and women in the workplace and to highlight the importance of everyone's participation in the economy. We also deal with territories, and we think that this does not need to be looked at from a trade point of view where we privatize systems and we trade nature. We want that Latin America is based on nature and centered around territories. We cannot tolerate violence, militarization processes that go against the respect to life. Political projects of emancipation need to be developed based on the fight for territory and land, and administered at the administration of jungles, territories. Public services play a role as well, so that we can have a popular control of the territories and not centered on a few political figures. These are all the social movements that are needed so that we can achieve our goals. Furthermore, we believe that information and collective information sharing is essential, because we need to exercise our rights of participating in a democracy. What are the best methods to do this? We are not opposing technology, not at all. Quite the opposite. We acknowledge that most of these are the results of creative processes and the result of creative collective thinking. And this has allowed the development of techniques that can respond to some of the challenges that we're all facing as part of humanity. So this is part of the sustainable process as well. As Friends of the Earth organization, we have been accompanying processes along with other movements, and we have also created our own initiatives, alliances, in aspects that are so essential, such as this has been shown with during the health crisis, access to food. We're struggling, we're fighting for access to food, and we're accompanying organizations such as Via Campesina on the notion of strengthening and developing new ways in which people can be nourished and fed. And food sovereignty has to do with people's rights, access to their own strategies, policies, and systems that are agricultural and have to do with production, supply, distribution, and small-scale farming, particularly. Agroecology and small-scale farming is vital in this, and women play an essential and central role on all of this, because female farmers all play a role in the different aspects of agriculture in society, and this is essential when we talk about food sovereignty. We also talk about energy sovereignty. We think that it's not possible that we continue producing energy for big corporations. Energy sovereignty that is proposed by Friends of the Earth projects a system of environmental energy that is ecological, that can guarantee the fulfillment of rights of the working classes of the local populations. Time is up. So this is an urgent matter. Fossil fuels need to be reduced, and we need to focus on renewable energies to face climate change and the climate crisis. And it's not just about that, but how we organize ourselves. The other element is the general management, the popular management of forests. This is vital for the systems that we want to put in place. Natural processes and the establishment of nature, the balance of it is focused on this. Many countries are rich in different landscapes, and this is essential to be maintained. And the last point is the focus on water. The right that society has towards access to water. Being autonomous on the water systems, there's a right to share this common good in society. So these proposals cannot be done in isolation. We need alliances, we need cooperation. This is vital so that we can actually implement some change. All of this being intertwined, it has to be a popular political project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvia. We can really feel bien vivir in every word you just mentioned, and is part of this work carried out by the Friends of the Earth. So now, I would like to give the floor to someone who's been carrying out a very important work, the member of the European Parliament, Delara Burkhardt, who's been discussing environmental issues in Europe, and she's recently had a very important project approved, and it encompasses the protection of Brazilian forests. So Delara, be very welcome to the Nature's Popular Forum and the World Social Forum, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and there's so much I would like to comment on and to share the thoughts with you. And I always think what makes the progressive family so amazing is that we might have kilometers between us, but we share a lot of the common analysis and what is the crucial problem. And I really am motivated by that, and it really inspires me a lot. I'm very grateful to be here. I did want to concentrate on the social ecological transition, but I wanted to point out that what Vilja Prashad said in the beginning on the vaccine and the growing injustices we are seeing within the COVID crisis. we would have had an urgent and a very important discussion when we wouldn't have the COVID crisis. And the problem is that now the situation is even more severe, that because we see in the shadow of this pandemic that the injustice and the way how societies are hit on this virus are very much even pushing our societies much more further apart. And I think this is a crucial situation. And as vaccines were talked about by you, Bea, I think I can assure you that we in the European Parliament right now are mobilizing that we at least the vaccines that were ordered by the European Union that won't be used here. There's a part of the treaty that forbids the EU right now to export and to give away the vaccines we have ordered. I think this is a crucial point of injustice, and we will fight on that. But this is not the subject today. I don't want to deepen on that. I want to go to the question of social ecological transition. So for over thousands of years, people have passed the earth from one generation to the next. And the next generation always inherits something from its predecessors. It might be technologies, contracts, economic system, and the existing injustices. And the question is our generation, is the generation of my children, I don't have yet, but I might have, is this the generation that is the unluckiest of all? Because for the first time in the modern history, the living conditions on our planet have been deteriorated so rapidly that we face serious problems, even more serious problems. If the climate changes, our life changes, our basis of existence changes, the sea levels rise, they threaten coastal cities, weather extremes cause crop insecurity, droughts cause water shortages. Many animal and plant species are living in a mass extinction. So where, by the way, also the zoonoses happened, and we see that pandemics result of the shrinking space for nature. So we also see that climate change becomes a growing reason why people need to leave their homes and need to search for refuge in some other places. And the problem of that is an economic system that by nature is only interested in profit maximization and sales markets. It's a system in which companies make millions without giving back to the society and the people. It is a system in where the powerful few fight against the interest of society. And it's also a system that allows the destruction of our livelihoods, of our planet, because by nature has no price of its own in this system. And I think we have to break up with the systems, and we need to push for this social ecological turnaround, and we need to do it together as a global progressive movement. And I will now focus on what I can do as a European lawmaker coming to our common agenda. I think public spending needs to prioritize people over profit. We need sustainable investments in education, in research for new technologies, in renewable energies, and we have to realize that we have to change our way of consumption, for example, when it comes to plastic, and we need to put a higher price on the emissions of pollutants. But what I want as a lawmaker, as a progressive lawmaker, is that the responsibility for that is not shifted to the consumer, but can be achieved through political regulation, to clear rules which we as society give to companies. So the important thing is that the transformation of our economy must be fair to all people and leave no one behind. And as we talked about, it's a question of global injustice. And I know that regions like the European Union, especially industrialized countries like my own, Germany, they can insure themselves against the consequences of ecological crisis at a great expense. And we know that especially emerging and developing countries are in a bad position. They are at the mercy of increasingly hostile conditions. And already today we have 26 million people fleeing the regions and their homes because of the extreme climate. And we know that this number is going to grow if we don't act. So I think the Paris Agreement and also the Sustainable Development Goals have been great common achievements we made. And we have to work to reach them. And we have to do it, of course, in our political systems, but also as a global community together. And I think this is why it's so important that we in Europe know our responsibility and take appropriate action. And we have a framework for that. Maybe you heard of it. We also think about the question of a European Green Deal, where we want to be the first continent that becomes climate neutral by 2050, the latest. And for this to succeed, we need all sectors, of course, contribute to that. But we also, and this is the challenges, this was the question I was told to answer first, that we have this challenge to see what are the consequences on building this, or the challenges that we are facing during this ecological transition. We have the situation that, Florence mentioned the question of the Gillian Jones, that we have to look that this transition is working on a fair basis, that no one is left behind, that we don't leave the price that might come from the shifting of the way we produce energy, for example, to those who didn't contribute to the system. We need the ones who contributed most emissions to pay also for this crisis. And this is not, we all know who this is. So it's a question of social, is organized in a social way. This will be one of the crucial points. And within Europe and the European Green Deal, also the question of currents comes on the agenda. And this is where I might, you announced the question of the forests. We on a European scale, but if we leave out the footprint we leave on a global scale, this is not current policy, and this is it's not taking responsibility for the way or the contributions we have to the global crisis we are in. So this is why what I'm fighting for in the European Parliament, that we see also that our way of consumption, our way of production leads to the violation of human rights and the destruction of valuable ecosystems, like, for example, the Amazon forest. But this is not just one example. So this is, I think, something that's going to be very hard, because you know how well the rich and the big ones, I say, how well they are in organizing their interest in this process of having a current political framework. So this is why I think we have to build up forces. And this was actually what Niels and I have been doing when we were exchanging for a couple of times now. And I think that we saw that the My Nation First approach has failed worldwide, and that we need this cooperation across borders to secure public global goods. So what I was told that we have the solution part in the second question round, but I think this is crucial, that we define strict regulation rules, not to make it the polluters and those who contributed to the global growing injustices get away with that crisis. So maybe this was the first introduction, and I really look forward. I hope we also can have the chance to react to each other and to discuss more on that. But this was my first impulse. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilara. Thank you very much. And I would like to hear more from the experience you have at the European Parliament and all the proposals. So now I would like to give the floor to Jaime Amorim from Via Campesina, whom on behalf of hundreds of organizations worldwide fight for peasant rights, food security, and have been working in agroecological production, which is essential when it comes to ecosocialism, ecological transition, and tackling the capital. So, Jaime, our greetings to the peasant community, and thank you very much for having accepted our invitation. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, you all. It's so important to be able to discuss this topic. I would like to say hello to everyone, especially Nilton Tato, and greetings to you all. So we are now going through a period which is different from other historical periods, or at least very recent periods that we had. We now have a combination of several crises, and they take place simultaneously. And this crisis worsen the situation, a situation that was already difficult. So now we have a profound and structural economic crisis, one that cannot be solved by accessory solutions. And I must say that many people are now trying and thinking about a post-capitalist world because taking into account the world we are in now, the capitalism per se can no longer find a solution for renewal. In the past crisis, at least in the past one, neoliberalism was an alternative. It appeared as an alternative, but today, given the deepness of the crisis, it would be very difficult, at least now, to have capitalism prevailing. At least in the past crisis, the crisis we had in 29, we had war as alternatives that would allow for the reconstruction. But we don't really see the possibility of having a war right now, and I do hope we won't have a war. Capitalism will hardly find a solution for itself. And as the member of the European Parliament just mentioned, we have another crisis, which is the environmental crisis. The environmental crisis represents the destruction of the very planet. Leonardo Bosch has been calling our attention to the fact that we should take care of what we call the common home, and we have to do this universally. We have two options. One, which take care of our environment, our common home, our common house, or two, this common house will destroy us. So we have the possibility of self-destruction. So if we take into account deforestation rates this year, the aggression to nature wealth, the rates in the past 2-3 years are staggering. So the humanity should be really concerned about it, and we should look for alternatives urgently. We have conservative governments, fascist governments, so it will be very difficult to find a solution that will be able not only to protect what we have, but also to restore, to regain our common house. And we have a third crisis, which is the political crisis. This crisis has been deteriorating in the past years. In some countries, the governments shifted from a conservative and right-wing position, which includes hatred, prejudice, and every possible cultural destruction that demobilizes the working class and the population in general. And these governments, they bring prejudice at the heart of the society. So the crisis that we are faced with now has to be immediately fought. So we need the popular basis to fight and to recover our ability to organize the population, our capacity to elect governments that put life at first and not the opposite. Of course, that Trump's defeat might represent a defeat of this ideological phase of the far right in the world. But in any case, the far right has been taking a role of destruction of what we consider as being fundamental, which is the social base organization, the organized society, the civil society as a project that will allow the organization and the sovereignty of the peoples. And at last, I would like to mention another crisis, which is the health crisis. The pandemic that took so many lives, and as we can see, many will die as a consequence of the incompetence of these governments, especially governments that are conservative and that put capital as a priority. So this shift, this transition has to be immediate so we can block the transmission of the virus and change the society. And I should say that the pandemic made the crisis even clearer because we had been in a crisis before. I can, for instance, talk about the low immunity of the population that, as of the Second World War, went through a period where they ate products that were produced out of poison and other products that are the result of the Green Revolution. And as a consequence, you have a population that whose health is weakened and whose bodies are not so immune to the spread of a virus such as this one, which brings devastating consequences. So maybe the main challenge, the main question for the society for the upcoming period is how can we produce healthy food so that the population will be able to feed its body and its society in a stronger manner, in a more immune manner to prevent pandemics such as this one we have. So at Via Campesina, as of the beginning of the pandemic, we have two major challenges. The first one is the agrarian reform. The agrarian reform must be replaced as an important issue. And why is the agrarian reform important for the entire world and more especially for some countries in Latin America, namely Brazil? Because in the future, we can see a post-pandemic crisis, which is a social crisis. The social crisis entailed by the pandemic, because it will happen because, you know, in June, July last year, when we talked about the post-pandemic, we thought it would be October, November. Now, we no longer know when it will come, this post-pandemic period. Based on what we on the information that we have, it will take a very long time until we can vaccine the entire population. So we still have a long period of pandemic ahead. Brother Jaime, you have 3 minutes. Yes. So the trend is to have a worsening of the situation that includes hunger, misery, violence, and injustice. So the agrarian reform is key, because that's the only alternative that we have in an economic crisis to maintain the livelihoods of the people and to ensure the rural population will stay in the rural zone. And the second challenge that we have is the food production. We can see in the horizon a food crisis, and peasants from all over the world, they have as a duty to produce food, and secondly, produce healthy food. Take advantage of the crisis so that we can effectively perform the transition to agroecology. That is a fundamental alternative that will improve the life conditions, the food conditions, and the health conditions of the population as a whole. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jaime. Our next speaker is Hugo Cabieses of the Socialist Party of Peru. And I'll invite him to talk to us, and I'm going to share with you his slide, because he has a set of slides here. So I hope that you will all be able to see my screen. Hugo, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Agnes. It's a pleasure to be with everyone here today. I think that this event on ecological transition, eco-socialism, and development is very important for America, but also for Peru, the whole of America and Peru. I would like to start by highlighting that out of the 10 participants, 4 are women and 6 are men, which is quite an achievement, because in Peru we say that when we have this type of forum, we have what we call the Toby group, where there's almost no women and it's full of men. And nonetheless, in Peru, on the 11th of May, we have the possibility of electing a female president, Verónica Mendoza. I personally belong to the Socialist Party, that's part of Juntos con Peru, which is part of a political alliance for the elections that will take place on the 11th of April. In any case, Verónica Mendoza would go on to the second round of elections. And that's the topic. We're going through a huge economic crisis, and I have named my presentation today at the 5 purposes of the forests in Peru and the post-pandemic. I think that my presentation has left the screen, but I'll continue. I don't talk about eco-socialism a lot during my presentation, but 50 or 55 years ago, I'm part of socialism, and I gathered a sentence from Paulo Freire. He said, it's incomprehensible, that we're able to sleep comfortably again after we've opened our eyes. I opened my eyes 50, 55 years ago, and I'm still on the same track. So I'd like to start by summarizing what the 3 viruses or pandemics are from my point of view. Firstly, the global pandemic, the recent one of COVID-19, that was created by zoonosis, that is nothing less than the contact with wild animals due to deforestation of tropical areas and due to the consequences of extraction, neoliberal and other natures that are the scourge and lead us to disease and death. We need only to access Google and social media to know that now there are more than 100 million people infected and 2.2 billion that have deceased around the world. In Peru, there's more than 1.2 million infected people and 80,000 that have died, with a health system that has collapsed. Unfortunately, the response of both our governments, I'm not taking into account Merino's dictatorship, but the president of Martín Vizcarra, who was removed from office due to suspicions of corruption, and the current system of Francisco Sarrasky, they act without criteria, logic, common sense, transparency, and equality, which is what Peruvians demand when we try to face the pandemic and the crisis, especially the poorest people around the country. A second virus is the extractivist neoliberal capitalism that from the 80s and 90s has also been killing people, cultures, institutions, natural resources, mainly water, forests, wetlands, and seas, oceans. Sylvia from Friends of the Earth has already referred to this. And a friend from India tells us that we do not need, rather that we need solidarity and not stigma, which is what we face on an everyday basis from a government. And we need cooperation and not criminalization of social struggles. A third element, or the third virus that kills us and that worries us constantly is climate change. That, as we all know, has been the result of greenhouse gases that are based on the use of fossil fuels, petroleum, carbon, gas, charcoal and gas, and cows that produce methane, and deforestation of forests that produces CO2, and at the same time absorb and produce CO2. That leads to this disimbalance in terms of the climate. This climate change also kills people and institutions, cultures, and releases viruses into the human atmosphere. The title of my presentation is the functions of the Andean and Amazonic region, and it has 5 main functions. The first one is that it's the lung of a good part of the planet, since its forests and plants produce oxygen. It's also the kidney of the world because its forests and jungles absorb and produce CO2, one of the main greenhouse gases. And the third one is it's a water source of at least 25% of potable water around the world that transform clouds from east to west into rivers, and it waters the coast of Peru, Ecuador, Chile, even the Argentinian southern part and Uruguay. I'd like to share a video with you, but we don't have the time now, but it's entitled, "Why Do We Defend the Amazon?" It's a very important point. Fourth place, the function of this region is to create a climatic equilibrium. It manages rain and the chemical composition of the atmosphere. Indigenous peoples already have good principles to work on this, such as the strategic reservoir that we should continue to implement in the 21st century. A third element that I'd like to share with you is the cycle of water, that is not created or destroyed, but that it is rather transformed. And the cycle of water, the water cycle, is the currents that are coming from the Atlantic into the Pacific Ocean, pushed by clouds and currents and the Aleutian winds, and that are established in the higher parts of the mountains of the Andes. And part of this water is returned to the Amazon, and the other one is shed into the western part of the Andes. So it's absorbed underwater, that is produced from these flying rivers, let's say, so that in Lima, one of the 3 cities of the planet located in the desert, people ask, where does the water come from? And the first answer is, well, it comes out of the tap. And that's not the answer. It comes from these flying rivers that originate from east to west, and they create the glaciers that are in the process of disappearing due to global warming. Next slide, please. My point of view is that we should not strive to return to normalcy or the new awakening, which has been referred to by the World Economic Forum recently. We should not return to this normalcy, and we should not accept this new initiative of the Davos Forum, which is more capitalism. And we disguise it with human faces and with green banners. It's actually the richest countries in the world. And this virtual forum was not carried out in Davos in Switzerland, but it's a major hypocrisy. We're also trying to build the foundations of another society, culture, economy, common sense, and to change the way in which we consume, produce, and consume energy, as well as the use of natural resources. And we need to prioritize the value use and not the currency use. We should not be guided by economic proposals such as the priority should be the value in itself, not trade. Trade is what has taken us to this terrible situation that we're in. The only exit, number 4, to save the planet in this context is what former president of Uruguay states: we need to organize in a strategic way what is solidarity, because not everything is trade, not everything is technological process, not everything is multiplying material assets. I think he is right. Next slide, please. These are some of the proposals from the left and social movements that are taking place in Peru. I'm just going to read out the main ones. We should face the pandemic from community organizations with focused quarantines and public investments for equipment and staff, and have more control on pharmacies and clinics, free vaccination, minimum wage income, and focalized bonds. The only way to achieve this is through a process that can lead to a new social pact, so that we can change the way in which we consume, we produce, and we consume energy. And thirdly, to acknowledge the multiculturality of our country, and to go back to ancestral knowledge on how to combat climate change, and focusing and promoting food security. This is the end of my presentation. I have already shared my presentation with the organizers. I hope that they can share it with you, this presentation that has a few more elements. But with this is my conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hugo, for sharing your views with us. You needed a few moments to really finish your years. But now I invite Tamara Munoz of the CUTA, who is Vice President of CUCHIA in Chile, where we can see all this effervescence. We said that Barbara would be here, but she had a problem. But Tamara is with us. And of course, I'm sure she will have just as good content in terms of her exposition. So welcome, Tamara. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Agnes, and thanks to everyone who's participating in today's meeting. First of all, I'd like to share a big a greeting from our organization from Chile. As Agnes was mentioning, the situation and what we're going through in our country is difficult. I think that experiences and practices that have taken place in our country are useful to trying precisely to debate today. Has to do with the just transition for social justice, climate justice, and that from unions in the Americas, we've seen that this idea of development is a concept that is always being debated. This debate is one of the main challenges, and we try to approach this from a sustainable development perspective so that it can provide jobs and put people at the heart of society. Our perspective of development is highlighting the pillars of decent work, the distribution of wealth, of participation in democracy, gender equality, and defense of everyone's rights, as well as environmental rights and a just transition. The idea of development is one that is sustainable, that takes into place political, economic, social, and environmental aspects. This vision on the just transition is shared in this idea of sustainable development, and it touches on all the main pillars that affect society, such as politics, economics, and the environment. And another challenge is the more conservative perspectives that limit the environmental impact and the protection of the environment as something different, something that is far from people. We do not share this standpoint, and we recognize ourselves as part of the planet, and due to this, we think of the need of the relationship between the environment and people. This relationship is mediated through work, through the different transformations of nature, and that's why we talk about a deeper debate on the production model and the consumption model, which are also part of the development of many countries. This is it's a model that excludes people, that has put lives of people in danger, and we need to change this. To reduce transition to new and renewable energies without transforming the model is something that we should strive to. Thirdly, recently we talked about future and the future of the workplace, that it's losing its center in the digital economy and the fourth industrial revolution. At the same time, we're going through an unprecedented crisis in the context of COVID-19, which everyone has referred to before me. And on the one hand, reveals that jobs and the work is at the center of fulfillment of basic needs and the function of the economy, society as a whole. And on the other hand, this crisis has been used by the capital and other governments to advance de facto workplace reforms. And this has led to a shift of costs from workers to teleworking, for instance, which is one of the ways of impoverishing working relationships even more, where the costs of what includes the operational aspects have been shifted onto the people and workers. The idea would be to have reforms that were not able to be implemented until now, and were the excuse of implementing them during this pandemic, the crisis of the pandemic. And this has been the case in many countries of the region, which in the end, workers themselves have been the ones who have had to cover the costs and empty their own savings, such as pension funds, retirement funds that have been used in the region. And this is how the costs have been covered, based on workers themselves. In a way, we're facing the challenge that the future of the workplace without rights arrived with COVID-19. And parallel to this, the speech of those who believe that the environment and society are opposed show that the pollution levels and the greenhouse gas emissions and the destruction of environments are the result of the crisis that we're going through, the reasons. And inequalities continue to increase, and they affect mainly the working class. A transition without justice is not what we suggest and propose. We are aware of the need of transforming the ways in which we produce and consume, but not at the expense of the cost of living and the way of living of workers. And our proposal then, that we had been discussing and creating for a few years now, is just transition. Just transition is a way to promote the union movements, both at national and regional levels, and it's based on the need to articulate the principles of social justice and environmental justice. Another challenge is given by the centralized powers within the debate and the need to go further than the guarantee for social dialogue, because as you know, social dialogue in our region does not exist. In the CCA, we say that transitions need to be inclusive, and those who use technology and appropriation are only just if they are based on life and work, both productive and reproductive. They promote decent work, and they ensure human rights and rights of workers. They promote democracy and redistribution of energy, and guarantee to the free access to public services. In a democratic system with participation of the workers, we think that we take into consideration the historical divisions that are being shown in during the crisis, both at national and international level. So we need to consider the asymmetry between countries and societies, and we reject the measures that ignore the root causes of the crisis, and they strive for peace in the territories and the access to land as well. Promote the agricultural reform and society that is not based on a patriarchal system. And the discussion is also centered around climate change, and trade unions have been discussing technology as a solution, but these factors are sometimes what define the asymmetric access to this technology, for instance. We are faced with transition as a response to the peak of automation and technology. This transformation and the deepening of the reform of production is yet another challenge. That's why just transition is now something that is transversal and that allows to share the different solutions that transnational companies and governments have tried to impose on people. Authoritarian governments that seem like supporters of the environment actually use this as an excuse to criminalize people even more during the pandemic, and this poses yet another challenge. A clear example is the Chilean government, which has installed different measures on the name of democracy without having even contacted the trade unions or the workers themselves, stating that they would provide help to those who were the most affected.
3 minutes.
It's the Chilean government that has persecuted people and reject the economic model that have led us to the social, economic, and structural crisis that we're facing at the moment in Chile. This is the end of my presentation, and thank you very much for the time given and that I was able to participate.
Thank you very much. We still have another activity in the World Social Forum, and we'll be speaking to two people who are already talking about intentionality. And if you want to take part, you'll be very welcome. I would like to invite the last speaker, but not least important, which is the Federal Deputy and member of the Nature's Popular Forum. And he is both in the forum as the National Secretary of the Environment and Development of the Workers' Party and as a federal deputy. And he has been a very important person in leaking this idea of the ecological transition within his party, the PT, the main party. Newton, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, Agnes. I would like to thank for the opportunity of being in this event, and I have learned a lot with the different people who have spoken, but I would like to provoke a little bit. I know that there are some people who brought some very important questions, but it's important to also debate with the people who are listening to us via the internet. First of all, I would like to thank you for all the work that you have done, Agnes. And for those who follow us, they know that we have the Economic Forum in Davos, and the World Social Forum was born out of this opposition. Last night, I was debating something else, which made me think, I don't know any other initiatives that came out of Davos that made any difference from the point of view of dealing with the social apartheid, or even in dealing with the climate crisis we're experiencing at the moment. And I cited as a question Brazil, as an example Brazil. We had something very important that happened a few years ago, is the development of a number of public policies whose main focus was born out of everything that we see in the World Social Forum. And what we had in Brazil is the fact that Brazil had left the hunger map. This was recognized by the UN. It's just to show that we can't expect anything from those people who meet over there in Davos, the Economic World Forum. But this event, the World Social Forum, does bring some answers. I would also hope that the Nature's Popular Forum also lives or has a long life, because it represents something that came out of the World Social Forum and brings something that is new in the left, which is the environmental agenda or the ecological issue. It is something that is part of the left. And as an example, I've been debating this in the Workers' Party. When we created 40 years ago the Workers' Party, we were debating democracy in terms of it being in the center, and we criticized everything in terms of the socialism we had at the time, especially what came from these. So I think there was a great revolution that we had, putting the idea of democracy very much at the center. And again, we need a new revolution on the left, which is to incorporate the environmental agenda, incorporate the ecological issue. And this is not a given on the left as a whole. And I can't admit this because I can't see how we can defend life, and I'm talking about all forms of life, as something that is not or should not be in the agenda of the left. But this is not given. We need to think about this, and we have to face this. That's why the Nature's Popular Forum needs to survive for a long time, to provoke the debate. And also we need to talk about the state of affair of what it means now. And when I think that we can't talk about a new society, a socialist society, if we don't think about the environment, if we're not aware that the environmental issue is priority. And we must understand this. We can see that the role of what the forests have, especially the Amazon in the world, and we are experiencing as a fruit of this government, but also of an anti-government, of an anti-science, of what we see now under Bolsonaro. But we can see that Amazon is recognized as the lungs of the world. But as everybody who's following us, the people who live in the Amazon, and not just the population of Manaus, but in other states in the Amazon, cities in the Amazon, are dying because of the lack of oxygen. And this is what we must face. And I would just like to conclude with a concept that I have been working a lot with. And when we look at a country like Brazil, that has built a pandemic, which is structural inequality, which is racist, which is misogynistic. I'm talking about Brazil, but it also represents a lot of other countries. And what we need to do is to put in the same level of our concerns the environmental agenda, but also the addressing inequality. Even because the poorest people around the world, around the cities, the rural people in the forests are the first to suffer the consequences of the climate crisis we're going through. It is the poor people who lose their homes. It is them who are left with no water, with no food, with the model of production we have nowadays, and so on. It is the poor people who most eat poison because of the agricultural mode that we have, because rich people nowadays eat organic food. But when I say that poor people also have responsibility to address this problem, is also important. And this is the concept of shared responsibility. And all of us must be involved, including individually, including the attitude that we have in terms of consumption and the individual behavior that we have in order to be able to act collectively, as Florence has mentioned today. We need to know what we each of us need to do, whether we're talking about a North Hemisphere country or a country in the South or a poor person or a rich person, all of us have shared responsibility. But we also need to be clear about differentiated responsibility. Of course, it is clear that Germany, Norway, and so on, who have gone through the type of development that we have seen, have a lot more responsibility to find a way out to a new model which addresses inequality and cares for life and the planet. This is also the same concept that we should apply in our country. We can't say that the former slave communities, indigenous people, have the same responsibility as industry owners and the upper middle classes. So the ecological transition and what we want for the future must incorporate, from everything that we heard today, especially from our comrades from Latin America, the experiences that show clearly the new knowledge that comes together with the ethnic plurality that we have here. There's no possibility to construct a new society if we don't incorporate everything to face the apartheid that we have here, that's been built in the last 2 centuries, that have put or created this huge inequality that those who produce oxygen are dying for lack of oxygen. This is really what I wanted to put forward, and we need to reflect, and we need to say, and I would like to conclude that it is not given on the left that the ecological concern is a priority, and it must be at the center of debates. This is very important because I cannot see from an ideological point of view who has more need to be talking about this than us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Newton. We're concluding our activity. So before we go to, we're now moving to a new moment. We have a question which we would like to ask you, our speakers. I would like you to answer them in 3 minutes so that we're able to conclude on time, because other people have commitments as well. And this is the question. Each of you, do any of you have any practical proposals, direct actions, a bill or mobilizations that should be a priority for the organizations here, so that they become part of the Nature's Popular Forum, or even for the people who are following us? So I'm going to ask the ladder to start, and then I will invite you, each one in time, to be talking about this. The ladder, please.
Thank you. I will try to make it short to hear all of your proposals. There was a mix of the question of the time zone in my calendar. This is why I was having a problem. So the first thing that I'm pushing for, which you already introduced in the European Parliament, is that we need a supply chain law in the EU for forest risk commodities, as I want to concentrate it on the question of Amazon, as we had a lot of talk about that. For forest commodities that are imported also to Europe, where importers would be obliged to ensure that their agricultural products did not come from cleared forests or areas where they were cultivated, harvested, where in doing so in the process of also violate human rights. So companies that wish to place agricultural products on the European market, therefore, would have to check their entire supply chains for sustainability and pay compensation if they injured third parties also on the ground. So this would be a new mechanism we would have also to see where, as Nirto was mentioning, where European companies, for example, have special responsibility for the situation on the ground, to have also the chance to remedy and to justice to the affected communities. So this would be one concrete policy proposal we are pushing for, and it would be amazing if there would be also others that support that to make it also actually happen. So the second thing I think is urgent in every question is that we have to mobilize, for example, in the questions like the EU-Mercosur trade agreement, that this one, or also every trade agreement we have, contribute to the question of sustainable development, and that they are not only filled with nice words of sustainability chapters where we declare goals that we have as communities, but also that they are not this mere declaration of intent, that there must be, and this is crucial for the Mercosur agreement, but every other agreement we have, that there are binding and implementable environmental standards so that the expansion of exports does not take place at the expense of nature and people. So we need binding chapters in those agreements, and we have to mobilize this on everywhere. So so this is basically two concrete proposals I would have. So protecting this, or to make transparent the supply chains by law, and also have the trade agreements being more sustainable in point. And I think we can mobilize for that together.
Thank you so much. Now, Professor Vijay Prashad, I give you the floor.
Okay, thanks. It's very hard to summarize one action or even two actions because we have cascading problems. But I want to focus on one issue, which I think bears on the question of medical apartheid, but also on the question of environmental destruction and climate change. And this is the issue of intellectual property rights. In the last round, the Uruguay round of the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which became the World Trade Organization, the big corporates pushed for a redefinition of intellectual property rights, which has made not actually intellectual property rights, but intellectual monopolies. What they've done is they've said that the product is patented, not the process. Used to be process-led patenting. Now the law is product patenting. This has enormous implications for climate change because any green technology controlled by some private company is not going to be transferred to other countries without consideration. It's very expensive to do this transition. There is no just transition until the logic of intellectual property is transformed. This is the same problem in pharmaceutical drugs. You can't reverse engineer a pharmaceutical drug now and create it in a different way. You have to still pay rent to these monopoly companies. So whether we talk about financial systems or we talk about green technology, or we talk about the question of pharmaceutical apartheid or medical apartheid, at the root of these problems, of course, it's capitalism. I understand that. But at the root of these problems is a very serious legal issue, which is not being addressed enough by the global left. And that is this way in which, in the cover of darkness, the big corporates, through the establishment of the World Trade Organization, totally transformed intellectual property rights. They claim intellectual property is for innovation. That's what they claim it's for, that this is all about innovation economies and so on. But this has nothing to do with innovation. These are companies that are essentially rent seekers. A firm like Apple doesn't actually make a phone. It outsources production and it claims rent of every iPhone or whatever it sells. These are rent-seeking companies. They are not innovation firms. They hide this behind a law which most people don't know about, the transformation of intellectual property in the 1990s from process patenting to product patenting. And I think there's going to be no green transition, friends, unless this is changed, because you're not going to see, the best green technology able to be used in countries like India, unless India is able to see technology and science transfer at a major scale. Not just that you move factories and produce these things in India. We need the transference of science, tech, productive information, and so on. Again, the slogan is cooperation, not competition. Let's face it, capitalism has failed us. We need a different system. Let's face it, okay? Let's not beat around the bush. Capitalism has failed us. And the capitalists continue to lie to us. They'll say that property is about innovation. It's not. It's about profit. Thanks a lot.
Cândido. Thank you very much, Professor Vijay. Cândido. I think Cândido left the room, so Florence. Yes. So first of all, I'd like to say that I like it very much to intertwined ideas. And I have actually 3 proposals. So these proposals are included in our political program and also in our actions. So the first one would be broader. That's what we call the green rule. The green rule would be something that we would like to implement at the state level in France, which is to put the green rule in the constitution. And by doing so, we wouldn't be allowed to take from nature more than what it can give to us. And of course, that it entails a change in the way we produce and we consume. So the fact that we have this concept set forth in the Constitution allows us to have a directing principle that allows us to think on the practical outcomes. And then the second proposal, which would be, how can we implement the ecological planning? The planning is a crucial issue. And actually, the planning is not part of the neoliberal discussions we have at the government level. So they always use expressions such as the Soviet view, old style views, and they do not allow us to actually think on the long term about the planning, the production, the reorganization of the production chain, the way we consume, and the reconstruction of the institutions that we need to have an ecological convergence. And finally, something that could be done as of now, I think, and something that is important to empower our message. I think that in the several spaces where we operate, in the several fronts where we are, in these areas that are more vulnerable, we should multiply mutual help and mutual aid and cooperation. We need to abandon the individualism and the political isolation. And of course that in Russia areas, it's sometimes more difficult for them to organize themselves. So we should reinforce the capacity of this population and these areas to organize themselves. I know that Latin America is a continent where the popular ecology and the ecological population is stronger. I learned a lot from them. And I would like to conclude by saying that here in Europe, we've had this background with cooperative, with commune systems, etc. But it's actually very difficult for us to organize major social movements that our Latin America managed to implement so well. So I think that we can exchange a lot of intentionalist knowledge. Thank you very much for the session. Thank you, Florence. Sylvia?
Importante. Creo que en el caso de nosotros hay, digamos, una línea de trabajo y de lucha internacional y regional, porque creemos que la lucha debe internacionalizarse, ¿verdad? Debe ser internacionalista, porque no hay soluciones que únicas, sino que las realidades son diferentes, ¿verdad? Pero en esa línea, y en la línea también que creo yo que es muy importante fortalecer las alianzas, porque aquí se ha hablado de diferentes aspectos, por ejemplo, todo el tema del mundo del trabajo, del mundo del ambientalismo, del feminismo, es decir, hay una gran cantidad de elementos porque la realidad es integral, ¿verdad? Y esa realidad integral requiere una gran cantidad, ¿verdad?, de pensamientos e iniciativas que en realidad hagan un cambio fundamental, porque ya se ha planteado que las crisis son crisis estructurales, o sea, es decir, el modelo capitalista, el sistema capitalista está dando visos de muchas crisis, ¿verdad?, que la vivimos los más vulnerados. Y en ese sentido creo que desde el movimiento ambientalista hemos venido trabajando en diferentes propuestas con aliados. Primero, el tema de la transición hacia una soberanía energética. Creemos que las sociedades dependientes de los fósiles ya no es posible, es decir, tenemos que haber un cambio. Y lo que planteaba era que no solamente es un cambio de la matriz energética, sino también es un cambio de visión para quién se produce la energía, para qué se produce la energía. Ese es un elemento para nosotros muy fundamental. El otro, que es más concreto, que desde hace algún tiempo en la campaña por el desmantelamiento del poder corporativo también hemos venido luchando por un tratado vinculante, ¿verdad?, sobre derechos humanos y transnacionales. Creemos que es momento de unirnos porque es un tratado que sirve y que nos va a ser de utilidad a los movimientos sociales, porque las corporaciones transnacionales en la región y en el mundo son agresivas, ¿verdad? Ellos tienen sus propios instrumentos para demandar a los pueblos y a los gobiernos, pero los pueblos no tenemos instrumentos para demandarlos a ellos cuando hacen violaciones de los derechos humanos. Entonces creemos que hay necesidad de ese tratado vinculante, de que sea aprobado pronto, y esa es otra lucha muy concreta que tenemos, no solamente a nivel regional, sino también internacional. Lo otro que creo que es fundamental es el tema de la formación y la generación de capacidades en términos de lo político y lo ecológico, ¿verdad? Requerimos de nuevos paradigmas del desarrollo, ¿verdad? Y esos nuevos paradigmas de desarrollo requieren todo ese análisis, o sea, cómo producimos nuestra comida. Ya la vía campesina ha planteado todo el concepto de la agroecología, ¿verdad?, que la acuñamos muchos movimientos, que creemos que es fundamental, ¿verdad?
I think it's fundamental and important. So we all have elements
¿verdad? Y eso significa también hacer un
on
mundo
how we're going to defend our territories. And we need to have an internationalist point of view, a solidarity point of view. Because only the internationalism can address this. We have so many countries which are being violated in their rights, in the rights of their community, by people, by companies extracting our water. And so it's important to promote international solidarity so as to ensure at least the rights of our brothers and our population. Thank you, Sylvia. Hugo, please. Thank you. I would like to thank everyone for all the contributions and information about all the struggles that you've been having in your own countries. I would like to say that in our case, the tensions are becoming unbearable, both in terms of the political and ethical crisis that we have in our country, but also in terms of having to face the fact that the two governments that we have since the pandemics and the struggles and the problems they have had in terms of the rights of the people, of the indigenous people of the Andean Amazonic region, but also is affecting people in general, the local farmers, and most specifically, the workers working in the agro businesses. And as a product of the struggle, we have had 4 people dead and a lot of people wounded in these agro businesses, which have been around for 30 years. It's not an agricultural proletariat, but we call them a precariat because their working relations are absolutely precarious. The sectors are now starting to organize themselves, and they are following those candidates, in this case, Veronica Mendonça, who's from the left. And she knows what we should be doing at the moment. And of course, in the medium term and the long term, it is important to think about their rights, because we have this criminal constitution which was approved through fraud in 1993 by Fujimori and his dictatorship, and we want to change this constitution and have a new social pact. Our movement and the way that we see things coincide almost fully with all the proposals that were brought forward today. I listened with much care what our comrade from India has said, and also Florence from France, from the French left, about ecosocialism. I would like to say that the struggle for the rights of nature is something very important, very intense, that we have to fight against this government, which is a transitionary government, it is true, but while it is there, it is a continuation. It's on automatic pilots in relation of to the last 30 years in relation of workers' rights and natures and the rights of the indigenous people, and the way that they dismiss the knowledge of indigenous people. And the way forward towards a new model of production, consumption, energy, and in using in a positive way the ancient knowledge of indigenous people is something that is very important. Less than a month ago in the Congress, we approved the coming of American troops to be here in different places in Peru. But American troops were not just looking at Venezuela, but against us. American troops are here because they want to have the possibility. They want to make sure that Veronica Mendoza is not president of Peru, or that we on the left have a large enough representation. I would like to conclude by saying to the people in PT in Brazil that you are our brothers and sisters of us in Peru. And I know that you're going to commemorate your 41st birthday on the 10th of February. So I would like to say thank you very much for inviting us, and have a good afternoon. Thank you, Hugo, and thank you for all the work that you have done in the São Paulo Forum, and we're very proud of it. So we now would like to invite Tamara. Thank you. In relation to the question, the America Atuca and the development of the Americas.
From a critical and popular perspective. So this platform, Development in Americas, was created in 2014 in cooperation with all central unions and other movements. This platform was updated in 2020, and the platform is a platform where we include several proposals, and this includes the environmental sphere, the strategy, and the proposal for ecological transition. Go through the exchange of information, experience, taking into account several struggles such as peasantry, feminist, racism, etc. So we were also able to share our vision for an ecological transition. And in the Union Confederation of the Americas, we are so sure that the current context is necessary for the transition. And we should fight not only together with trade unions, but also with other movements, and think strategically about the trade unionism we are in need now. And these topics are very present in our platform, as well as the defense of democracy as a fundamental principle to think and create plural societies. I would like to thank you all. I would like to thank for all the experiences you shared during this conversation. And this is very important for for this debate. So I thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you. Thank you, Tamara. Brother Jaime, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I would like to summarize in 4 proposals. 2 very objective and concrete ones, and 2 proposals that are more subjective. So we wanted a project through which we plan to plant 100,000 trees in our settlements. But this should become a public policy, and reforestation and the planting of trees should be foreseen as a source of income for the peasants, so that above all, the peasants can operate as defensors and also builders of this process. Secondly, for 10 years, we fought to approve the Declaration of the Peasant Rights at the United Nations. In 2018, we obtained the approval. Now we have new challenges ahead. The peasant rights included in the declaration are very important because they bring about concepts that were discussed at Via Campesina and in other forums as a concept of agroecology, territory, food sovereignty. But as of now, these rights are included in the declaration. And it's very important because we have an inversion of the process in a way. So we set forth important changes, important shifts. So now we are able to have a legal discussion in the countries based on a legal document. So we have to work in order to have the countries ratifying the declaration so that the peasant rights foreseen in the declaration become a binding rule. So each country should carry out a specific work. And here I'm thinking about Nicaragua. Bolivia was very advanced in the process, and it is important to have such a discussion in all the parliaments in our countries. And you know, it's not about goodwill. We must ensure this will be enshrined in the Constitution. And as a consequence, we will be able to have environmental rights and food sovereignty set forth in the legislation. And another proposal is related to the changes we needed to operate. So we will be discussing environmental topics, environmental rights, the defense of the nature. And it goes through one, a shift in the mindset of the political representatives, the lawmakers, the population. It should be included in the school curricula. So it must become part of our day-to-day discussion. The legislation should be amended so that these topics become part of what is taught to children at school, at the primary level, at the secondary level, and we should also have courses at the university. And a fundamental change is a political shift. As long as we have this economic model where only profit matters, profit will always be put before other questions such as life, nature, people, fundamental wealth, and the right to life. So it is key that we fight for political change, because only through political change we can effectively create development models that are better, more equitative, and that can have such discussions that allow defending the rights of peoples in the nature. That's what I had to say. Thank you. Thank you, Jaime. I give the floor to Nilton Tato. It's difficult for us to pick one action, but I would like to talk about a topic that was important and will become even more important, and also as a consequence of the pandemic, which is food production, the agriculture model that we have in place. Here in Brazil, thanks to a project that was created together with the peoples of the forest and the social movements and environmental entities, etc., the university as well. Here in Brazil, we have a national policy of agrotoxic reduction. It is important for people, it's important that people know Brazil exports poison. You know, our colleagues from Europe, it's important to have such a debate. The agricultural model that we have in Brazil, in addition to destroying the nature, the forest, the water, and etc., I mean, on the top of killing people, because in order to produce, the lands are invaded, expropriated, people are expelled, persecuted, and killed. So in addition to all this death, this agricultural model is also very contaminating, and the public power have an expense to clean all this poison that goes to this food, which is produced in these areas that are exported worldwide. So we held a debate in Brazil. And that's why I'm saying that it's important to have this debate internationally, because it also entails a discussion about the subsidies given to this type of agriculture. Here in Brazil, we have the national budget for 2021, and Brazil will give tax exemption in the amount of 4 billion Brazilian reais to the production of pesticides. I'm not talking about the entire agricultural model. On the other hand, when it comes to family agricultural production, there is no type of incentive. What I'm trying to say is that it is important to have a debate about this topic internationally, everywhere. And it's important to have such a discussion with people who consume this type of product. So it's not only something that concerns the peasant population, but everyone who consume this type of product. So that's the provocation I would like to make. I know that the movements related to Via Campesina, peasant movements worldwide have been discussing this topic, have been in this fight. So I'd like to reinforce the idea that this debate should go beyond the sphere of hoarder movements, and it should reach urban centers and the ones who consume this type of food. So thank you very much for the opportunity. It was a pleasure to listen to all of you and to learn from all of you. Thank you. Thank you, Nilton. I would like to thank you all for participating at this rich debate. So people want us to have a transcription of everything that has been said. So, I mean, thank you so much for everybody who took part, people who watched us live via social networks. And before I conclude, I'd like to thank once again Helena Marker, Jula Felmanas, Paulo Silveira, and Melina Revuelta, the interpreters. For conference interpreters that worked very hard in this meeting and who worked very hard in the background. And the interpreters say, it's our pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And also thank you, Pedro Cruz and Amanda Castro, who was in the backup to help in case of need of urgent action. So I hope that we'll have other opportunities to continue this debate. And in a few minutes on the Populous Nature Forum on Facebook and YouTube, we will have Mônica Valente from Foro de São Paulo and Antônio Lisboa, the Secretary for International Relations at the Central Union in Brazil, to discuss the rights of the peoples of the forests, because we know it's not possible to have a real transformation and a real transition before we have the struggle of classes. So thank you very much for attending our forum, and see you next time. Thank you, and fora Bolsonaro, out Bolsonaro.